Welcome to Agri Extra at NAMPO Virtual. My name is Mpumelelo Mkhabela. In this session, we'll be talking about partnerships. South Africa is a country with a divided history where partnerships between different players have often come very hard. And in the agricultural space, it can't even, it could not have been gotten worse in the past. But now, the sector is charting a new path. And in this session, we'll discuss how different players are coming on board to try to resolve the issues of agriculture and try to put the sector on a path of sustainability. Joining me in this panel is Leona Achari, who is the interim CEO of the recently established Agricultural Development Agency. And next to her is Malcolm Ferguson, who is an associate of the same organization, and I understand a successful farmer himself.
No, I've done many things. I've never farmed.
And on my immediate left here is Miss Langasimela, who is manager at ABSA for agricultural business development. And I've got two colleagues who are joining me from afar. And that's Wandile Sihlobo, who is the chief economist at AgBiz, as well as Sineli Zwi Fagate, a farmer in the Eastern Cape, somewhere in Mthatha. I understand he's a very successful farmer. Hopefully next time he'll bring us a gusha here. Anyway, to kick off the discussion, my panelists, I'll start with you, Achari, Leona. In terms of this new organization that has been established, for which you are the CEO, what are your key objectives insofar as partnerships are concerned?
Thank you very much, Mpumelelo. I think that the agency, Agricultural Development Agency, is really built on the foundation of partnerships. And the idea and objectives of the agency was really to bring blended finance, affordable, accessible finance to farmers, to bring market access as well as skills development. And the idea that we have is to link tried and tested models using good jockeys, that means good commercial farmers, people who have best practice models that have already been implemented, and match them with emerging smallholder farmers and commercializing black farmers. And I think we've been able now over the last few months to bring together a wide range of stakeholders that have joined up as founding members. And for us in moving forward, partnerships will be key to implementing successful projects.
Yeah, Malcolm, I mean, as an experienced business person, you know that business is about competition. People compete. They compete for business models, they compete for market share, they compete for virtually everything. Yeah. Now, how difficult would it be to bring people who should ordinarily be competing in a partnership model that works?
Well, let me say that from the point of view of partnerships between companies and businesses in the private sector, there are imperatives that very often drive people to cooperate together. And I think if we look, let's just look, for example, at NEDLAC, yeah, which is focused on economic development and particularly the issue of labor. There's a common interest that the private sector has, together with government and organized labor, in creating and facilitating the right kind of operating environment in which labor as stakeholders in businesses who are employers, and government facilitating particular outcomes. So all three here are actually in that virtuous triangle of cooperation. Yeah. And there's nothing that prevents anybody in the agricultural sector from looking to do exactly the same thing. That imperative is most definitely there in South Africa.
Yeah, and Langa, for you, coming from the financial sector, do you think such a partnership model is viable?
Definitely. For me, I think that is the way to go. What I find working with the developing sector, I must say that, and I always say that, I came out from working with farmer organizations, developing farmers, into the bank, and I thought, yippee, I've got all the solutions. Yeah. But then you realize there's a big gap between what we do in development and what is required for the farmers to actually access commercial finance and be able to pay it back. And that big gap is, we need partnerships such as in the AGDA to to cover that gap, to be able to provide the technical assistance, to be able to provide the development finance with much easier terms, softer interest rates and so on, and enable those farmers to pay it back and actually develop a culture of borrowing and paying back. And only then can you then step them up to commercial lending. In a lot of instances, I think we run development programs, lend to farmers, and maybe because they don't really have to pay it back in most instances, it looks like they've made profit. And then you take them to the commercial lender. Now they must provide a history of their performance. Most instances they haven't kept that, the production record, the financial records, and a whole lot of documents that they must provide. And you find that they've actually never done that because they've never had to do that. So that whole process takes you a whole long time to actually lend this client and be eventually able to release a loan from them. Then things are late, planting season is late, and so on and so on. Things go wrong during the whole production system. They don't get the yields they should, and now they're not able to pay back this loan, which comes at a cost with an interest rate. So definitely a partnership like an agricultural development agency is very key.
Some people might say, yeah, you want other partners to help you mitigate risks.
I think we need the partnership to help the farmers to deal with the risk. And when they're able to then deal with the risk, you let them to a commercial lender. Look, commercial lenders we have to deal with the risk. You cannot lend to a risky business. It's to the disadvantage of the borrower and the disadvantage of the financial institution itself. And I always say more to the borrower, because you end up with this big debt if you're not able to pay it back. And somehow, because of the regulations in the financial institutions, in the financial environment, you have to pay back.
But to come back to you, Leona, but I mean, this is obviously not a question of finance only. You are looking at the entire value chain, right?
We're looking at the entire value chain, and I think that in the past, even if you found government, like Langa is saying, giving grants into the agricultural sector didn't solve the problem. Grants helps people to produce for one season, and then nobody keeps sufficient capital to move to the next season. So the idea then is to, one, ensure that people understand agriculture as a business. And the way in which the agency will operate is to use the skills and the expertise that sits also within our partner organizations to make sure we transfer those over to the new farmers, to understand it like that. And then the market access is obviously also critical, because that helps commercial lenders to actually begin to consider that farmer as a business, because he will have access to a market, he will be producing for a market, and with the support and the jockeys that we are bringing in, he'll then bring his sustainability into the system of agriculture. And I think that's what's needed now at the moment.
Let me bring in Wandile in the discussion. Malcolm here says this a partnership that has been formed like this one is more like a NEDLEC. I'm not sure whether NEDLEC is well covered in glory. You have also been involved in this formation of AGDA, if my information is correct. What's your take? I mean, do you think it's a viable model to deal with all of these problems that we're having in this country as far as agriculture is concerned?
Thanks, Pamela. I do think that what AGDA plans to put on in the agricultural market space is one of the key things that we do need in this sector. I mean, the challenges are wide, as you rightly say. We have the financial sector side, but we also have the skill side, but also the fact that we're all not buying in on a common vision. In my mind, what AGDA presents, it also creates a space where it could play also somewhat as an incubation house to a certain extent, where those that have some bit of skill and some capital and those that really need to join in the sector can find a place and be able to be assisted on that. But obviously, I think that it will need participation of many people in society, government being one of those key stakeholders, but also a bit of a private investors also coming in and putting on a bit of capital onto that. But certainly it is something that I think is essential, because a number of times or previous few years, we've written a number of these plans where we try to say, how do we bring about transformation in agriculture? How do we bring about progress? But when you look at it 5 years, 6 years down the line, we have very little to show that we have actually been able to do these things. So I think that now we do have an opportunity where we can actually be able to do it successfully. But I also think the conditions of today, they do force us to come into these partnerships. The government president yesterday said it, and I think you said it also on your Twitter, that there is no money in the country, but also the skills issue that is also a shortage. So private sector, public is needed to come into place. And I think guys like us, Nelly, who also weigh in into those things about, from a farmer perspective, how do they see such initiatives?
Indeed, I mean, but from your perspective, where do you see, would there be low-hanging fruit as far as this is concerned?
I think AGDA obviously would have to play in a part whereby, let's say, if you look at the policy frameworks that the country has been putting up over the years, take, for example, the NDP. It's one of those that many people in society still buy in and say it does highlight what needs to be done. But what we don't have is the action plan of how do we actually get then to get transformation and progress actually happening at a ground level. That's where I think that institutions like AGDA and other partnerships that are out there in society can begin to play a part on and bringing in developing farmers, some private capital, as well as on the public sector side, and try to make these things happen.
Yeah, and let's bring in here Sinelizwi, who is actually farming somewhere there in Mthatha. Sinelizwi, welcome. But let's tap into your own experience. The discussion here is about partnerships, getting private sector players, big and small, coming together, financiers, retailers, farmers, coming together for a common purpose of, reinforcing each other's work for the common benefit and dealing with some of the legacy issues we're having in this country. Now, where you are, where do you see yourself benefiting from something of this nature?
Thanks. I think most importantly, it's to say that I'm fortunate enough to be an example of a public-private partnership, predominantly more private than anything. So what's happened here is that I've had the privilege of having people who have the know-how, one, have got the access to the capital, two, that is a soft loan structure. That's how I got my business off the ground. But again, it goes back to the type of jockey that is being backed on the race course, as it were. With regards to the agricultural game. Now, all farmers will tell you about passion. All farmers will tell you about commitment. All farmers will tell you about the toughness this business that this business entails should you need to be successful or want to be successful. So I think I understand, and that's why I've more than willing to become part of AGDA. It's to say it's an organization that I feel is hitting home pertaining to a couple of things. Now, marketing, I think we've spoken about at length. For example, for me to be transporting sorghum to Johannesburg at 600 Rand a ton, that cost of the per ton price of my product is hitting my bottom line hard. So how am I then supposed to graduate to commercialization in a sustainable manner if I'm faced with such barriers of entry? So I think for me, the approach in terms of the organization is critical. Look, as I said, and I think Leona mentioned it, there are already existing models. And I'm a prime example of an existing model. And I would say that because, there are a lot of farmers like myself. And I think AGDA will take advantage and needs to take advantage of who's out there that is already doing it to achieve the necessary success in terms of the ground. So a lot of the farmers exist. To me, it's not a matter of necessarily production. A lot of the farmers have got basic understanding of production because programs have been pumped in terms of government and other private initiatives for many a year. We have to transform the mind into a setup, as is what AGDA is looking to achieve. But ultimately, what are the models that are working? How are we going to achieve in terms of commercialization, in terms of farmers now? And from a public sector perspective, if we are to achieve commercialization, why are farmers not having title deeds of land reform farms? Where are those title deeds? Why are we working with lease agreements to try and convince a bank to release funding? So what is promoting government to have that kind of a thinking? Farms that are redistributed have got title deeds. Where are those title deeds for farmers to be able to access financing? Thinking like that is what we on the ground are saying. Those are the practical steps to take should we achieve commercialization through partnerships like what AGDA is trying to achieve.
You say you are a prime example of or an outcome of successful partnerships. At what stage is your business at the moment? Are you crawling, or are you walking, or are you flying?
I will say I'm crawling, and the only reason is because I've come to understand that my business needs to achieve more for it to be more sustainable. So I need to tap into the value chain. Now, to tap into the value chain, there's current role players. And having those current role players, what am I bringing that's different, that is going to be allow me to be economically sound in that second level? So there's a strong base of primary producers. But now we need to graduate. And in terms of graduation, it does not necessarily mean, I must continue taking my sorghum to Randfontein, for example. Why isn't that kind of a system happening closer to the farmers? We know that, for example, I'll go to Eastern Cape. That's the next grain hub as policymakers and economists are looking to. So those kinds of things for me are saying those are the areas where farmers can graduate to, and that's where the commercialization is, to process my product. I need to be able to process my product now for me to say that I am actively participating in the two value chains. How I do it is some of the partnerships where I think AGDA is going to be very useful for farmers like myself.
Malcolm, I mean, how can we fast track a process that he clearly needs for him to fly? He doesn't want to tell us whether he's crawling, walking, or flying. But I can see, definitely he's not yet flying. How can we get him there?
I'll tell you something. Many conversations I've had with Sinelizwi, it won't take long for him to fly. He's a very, very smart man, and he's a very good farmer. Yeah. So there are just some hurdles for him to overcome, and AGDA will assist him. But I think that the notion of partnership. I'll give you a very good example of something that I've worked on today. Yeah. Through a colleague of mine who's working with me. He spoke to me about the owner of a pack house near Johannesburg, state-of-the-art pack house, where he's received a lot of assistance to set it up from government. So there's already a partnership between him and government in terms of setting up his pack house. But his problem is actually the fact that he doesn't have enough access to farming produce to put through his pack house. And here to the north of Pretoria, we have a young farmer who actually has 35, I think, or 36 small farmers who are producing for him. He provides them with seed. He provides them with different kinds of support. He buys their produce from them, and he's looking for outlets. Now, AGDA as a network organization is focused now on putting the gentleman to the north of Pretoria, who has a lot of product, who at the moment is only able to sell the produce that he buys from the people who he's supporting on the markets, either in Pretoria or in Johannesburg, where he doesn't get top prices. Yeah. But if he had access to a pack house where those items could be packed and packaged so that he can go into a Woolworths, then you're having a look at an entirely different situation. So there's an example of somebody who has a pack house where government is invested, a young emerging farmer who has these people who he's supporting in the Hammanskraal area north of Pretoria, and just putting those people together. In other words, AGDA acting as a deal maker, putting people together so that they can do these things. And then once that is in place, and there's an off-taker, there's Woolworths who's part of the value chain, there's the pack house that's part of the value chain, there's the young farmer in Hammanskraal who's got 35 people who are producing for him, who's part of the value chain. You build that into a credible supply chain, and suddenly you're looking at something that a bank has interest in.
Yeah.
So there you have something where government is part of it, where a bank can be part of it, and where all of these businesses then become successful because you start with the small producer and you take yourself right through to the supermarket.
Yeah, yeah. I would imagine, Leona, these kinds of retailers having access to the producers, emerging, established, and whatever stage they are, it kind of like eliminates the excuses that some of them have to say, listen here, I would like to procure to an emerging farmer, but where are they? Doesn't it eliminate that excuse?
Absolutely, and I think that is an excuse, but also a challenge that they face, because often, even as they've tried their emerging farmer development programs, they've not had the success they wanted to, because they invest in the production only, but not in the full cycle or the full value chain that we are talking to. And I think with the partners that we're bringing in and the model that we are implementing, you bring sustainability into that process. Yeah. You bring the right skills level into the process. Because remember, it's not about just showing someone today and walking away from them. It's about walking a journey to make sure that they get up to the levels of quality and sustainability of supply, which is what the retailers have been looking for. So indeed, the idea of AGDA is that we will eliminate those excuses, just like Malcolm is saying, by working then with the farmer, with the partners that we have, and having that value addition. And I think also with the comments that Sinalizwe is making, I mean, Eastern Cape indeed is an area which has all of this maize that is growing, and many smallholder farmers, many communal area farmers engaged in grain farming. But the idea now is, how do you bring the value addition infrastructure into the same spaces that our farmers are in? And I think that's where the public-private partnerships that we are talking to will come into play. How do we attract investment, private sector investment into the space, and which enabling infrastructure would government focus on in that space? Example, your road infrastructure, your storage infrastructure, etc.
Yeah. I mean, Sinelise, we raised the issue of land and wanting to use land to access more financing. And I want to bring here Wandile and Langa, because there's a debate here whether does it really matter who owns the land. I mean, there in the Eastern Cape, there's a community there in Kentani. I think they're working with Wiphold and Flores Robe. And the land is communally owned. But it has, they've managed to demonstrate that actually, if you bring in expertise, technical know-how, you bring access to market, and you bring a level of organizational discipline, you can actually get the right yields cost effectively, and then the communal farmers can club together and make it viable. So clearly, the ownership of the land there is not a big deal. They own the land, but it's communal. They don't necessarily have title. So does it really matter? Why does it matter, Lang?
It's for two things. One is a security of tenure. So if we are going to be lending into somebody who's using land, you want to be assured that they're going to be there for that period of production and be able to pay back and so on and grow on that land. You wouldn't want to lend to somebody that halfway through the process somebody says, no, but by the way, this land belongs to so and so. And then you're not able to continue. So that's one.
But communal land has proven to be very stable.
Yes.
You hardly have someone expropriating somebody's land. It belongs to this community. It rather lies fallow, but nobody will take it.
Yes, but then it's the decision making around what the land is used for, isn't it? I mean, I remember when I was at NAMPO, worked with these farmers, and they decided they were going to now manage their grazing area, fence it off, and all that. And once they got started, they had all the materials ready. And then somebody says, but there are graves here, there are this, and then the project can't carry on. So it's those kind of things that you've got to manage it. And to your point, yes, they can be managed. If they can be managed, well and good, you can proceed. And the second aspect is the collateral value. And basically, the collateral value of the land reduces the cost of borrowing from your side. Because you say that I've got this land, it's valued so much, and we can then use that to reduce the cost of borrowing. And I'm happy to say that there is progress in that discussion through the blended finance discussions with government.
That takes into account different ownerships.
Yes, and especially with the proactive land acquisition whatever policy, where the land is leased out in 30 years. There is a consideration, to register that with the deeds office, because then for us as commercial lenders, that says it's a secure tenure. That's the law in the country that makes us aware that it is a secure tenure. And secondly, once it's registered, it has a collateral value in it. So it's easier to lend in it. So the big thing really is those two, security of tenure and the collateral value of the land.
Yeah. Wandile, are you still with us? Oh, yes, you are there. Did you get my question?
And I did. I pretty much agree with all of that, which Dr. Langa has just said. And what I can add perhaps onto that is also that if you listen or you engage with the policymakers, at least for now, they are also coming to the realization that long-term tradable leases are some of the things that are important to prioritize and see how you deal with that. And I think that in part might address what Sinelizwe had raised, the issue that they need the long-term tradable leases there or title deeds to the farms that they are operating on. Because the sentiment that I'm getting is that all of the land reform farms that are sitting more in a government hand, they need to follow through that stream. But obviously the approach when you go to the communal land side, it might not be as fast as that because there are a lot of cultural dynamics which you need to factor into that. And I must say though also to the example that you are mentioning, you can't really, yes, that has been a great success, but you can't really go with that as a cut through across all of the country because it also depends about how best can a community find unity in a vision and dedication and long-term commitment. Those folks, they've managed to do that, but that's not what you see across all of the provinces in the former homelands. So yes, it helps in the near term, but I will caution and not say we should only be looking onto that. And the second point that adds that becomes important because title deeds alone are not something that is going to make finances become cheap and people fly into these areas. Is what Leona was talking to. The issue of the infrastructure is important. And if you talk to folks like Dr. Makopa, the president, they begin to speak about those things for water, road and networks and all of those things. Those will be key, particularly for the former homelands provinces when we begin to think about agricultural development.
Yeah. Let me come back to Malcolm. The big agricultural players, some of them have been very critical of government, that the government doesn't do this, the government doesn't do that, legislation this. Does AGDA represent the end of complaints in a sense that here is a structure now where whatever they would like to do, they can do it themselves?
That's called a curved ball in baseball. In essence, AGDA is an organization in the political sphere that is agnostic. We essentially see ourselves as operating within an environment where there's a given government policy and we will work within that environment. So the people who have the job of lobbying government for the achievement of policy change, those people exist somewhere else. They don't exist in AGDA. But let me give you an example of something in a follow-up to what Wandile said and to what Sinelizwe said, that will give assistance from AGDA's side to the bankers. We're looking very hard because, as I've just said, there's a given policy environment with respect to the use of land as collateral, if it is being farmed on communal land or if it has been part of a process of transfer to farmers with leases by government. In AGDA, we're looking at working with some people in the financial sector who are very innovative in terms of their thinking, using the value that is produced on land, which of course has value in and of itself. It's intrinsic value, basically to lock up in that value of produced agricultural products into a form of tradable asset, just like a silo certificate where you own maize inside a silo is a tradable asset. To look at instruments of that kind that can then be can serve with banks as a form of collateral to finance somebody like Sinelizwe. And we're having a very good conversation on that type of approach. So we accept that there's a problem around that issue, but we're not going to lobby government on that issue. That's for Sinelizwe to do through his farmers' union. We're going to work with the policy that we've got.
Maybe I should put Langa on the spot. Langa, are we going to see some charter here, financial sector charter related to specifically agriculture? from the bankers. Would that be a good idea? I'm not sure whether the previous charters cover themselves in glory at all.
There have been discussions, and I know they even went as far as Parliament in terms of financing agriculture. But look, I can only speak about what we are doing internally as APSA. If you're talking about charters, the Financial Sector Code itself, which is the code of the broad-based Black economic empowerment, it's actually got a sub-element there that says Black agri-financing. So each financial institution is measured against that in terms of, how much advances you've made to the developing sector.
But it's submerged in the bigger scheme of things. It's not like it's lifted as a special initiative. So you need to kind of like elevate it now.
It's all part of empowerment finance. But look, to your point and to the point of the discussion, this is one of the big sectors we have in the country. It's one of the sectors that's been performing well. It's one of the sectors that there's been a whole big discussion around transformation. So for me, if you're a lender in the sector, it's one of the things that you definitely have to address and lift out yourself. I don't think you have to wait for the charter to actually lift it up for you and say, this is how much you're doing. We as institutions can do that on our own.
Maybe as we wrap up, I just want to go back to Sinelizwe. From where you are, what appetite do you think exists in your community for more people to join and be part of what you are doing?
Oh, it's huge. You must remember, I'll speak for the younger farmers, so the next generation of farmers coming into the system. You've got a serious percentage of guys that are doing it in half a hectare or has got 200 chickens somewhere in the backyard. There's a lot of those pockets of guys that are actually gaining the traction, or should I say, gaining the attention towards agriculture. It exists. Now, funny enough, where I work from a rural development perspective, over and above my private farming, is that you've got about 40% of the farmers in our database as a program that are youth. And our program specifically looks at commercializing, farmers, either communal land-based and or land beneficiaries. But the takeaway here is the appetite for agriculture as a way of life, as a way of economic upliftment, food security and sustainability exists. The question then beckons to say, an AGDA kind of an instrument, how well are we going to be answering the questions that exist? And for me, it's a situation of how well, for those like myself who have had the opportunity to be exposed in the industry, how well are we linking both models as well as the people on the ground to make sure that we're achieving what we're looking to achieve, regardless of what farmer, of where he or she may be. But the appetite is high, it exists. It's a matter of just making things work in terms of getting the results. And that's what we're wanting to see as farmers on the ground, the results of progress and growth.
So Wandile, clearly this story that young black people are not interested in farming, they just want to drive Rolls Royce in Sentin, is not true.
There's actually been research coming out of Rhodes University end of last year, which they did, some community survey across the Eastern Cape and other section, I think KZN or so. And it's not true. But what I would say, at this point in South Africa, the key things that we will be left with when we get out of the pandemic is high unemployment and low levels of economic growth. And that's both in the urbanized areas as well as on the rural economy side. And now the question is to say that in the rural economy side, what role can agriculture play? And we are clear on those things throughout various plans. Therefore, I think the institution like AGDA, that's where they will actually be coming on into, on ensuring that at least we do realize the opportunity and the potential that we've been talking about for many years in South Africa. And like I said also in the opening remarks on my side, that the environment now forces us all to say those that are in private sector and those that are in public sector, they need to come on to the table to ensure that we do boost the economic opportunities within this sector. And I think it's the right time.
Yeah, well, that's great news to hear. I mean, we've heard a lot of pessimistic things about young people not being interested in agriculture. So it's wonderful news to hear from Sinelizwe that actually there's appetite and he's just not talking. He's actually an example of that appetite that's coming up in that sector. So thank you so much for joining us, Sinelizwi from AFA, and thanks Wandile for joining us in this panel. And my other fellow panelists, thank you, Leona, thank you, Malcolm, and thanks, Langa, for joining us. And that was it for this session on partnerships, and hopefully you'll join us again next time. Thank you so much.